Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. Today's video is a long one, so I'm not going to waste too much time in the introduction, just enough to tell you that today I'm using Let's Resin's Flex Rubber to make absolutely adorable squishies. If that sounds like fun, stay tuned and enjoy the video. Let's have a look and see what you get inside Let's Resin's Flex Rubber kit. Before you even open the box, there's a lot of information on there. That's one of the things I like about Let's Resin's packaging. There's always lots of information and it always looks great too. So first of all, we have the bottles, part A and part B, and it's a 1-to-1 mixing ratio by weight. Next are the 5 packets of flocking powder, which is added at the end to stop it from being sticky and to make it nice and soft and fluffy, but these can also be used to colour your flex rubber. Then we have the mould. This is the paw print mould with 4 paws in there, 2 matte and 2 shiny. And then we've got 2 mixing cups, which are very handy. Then we have the box, which is for adding the flocking onto your finished squishy. We have lots and lots of bags for putting your squishies into when they're finished. And we have the very detailed instructions, which is one of the things that you always get with Let's Resin. Detailed instructions with lots of pictures. Here's the mould that came with the kit, the paw print mould, and it's the first one I will be using. It has a matte side and a shiny side, although I'm not sure that I could see much difference in the finished squishies. I have my weighing scales ready, so let's get measuring. Each of the paw prints weighs about 20 grams and I wanted to do 2, so I'm weighing out 40 grams altogether, so obviously 20 grams of A and 20 grams of B. You might notice that my bottles are not completely full, and that's because I already had a practice before filming this part. I learned a few things during my first attempts, and I will tell you about that later on because I think my mistakes will be useful to you. Once I'd finished measuring out part A and part B, it was time to give it a very good mix, and I mixed it for about 4 minutes. The thing with it is, because you can't see the difference in the 2 parts, they both look exactly the same. You can't tell by looking at it when it's completely mixed, so it's best to give it a little bit longer. Make sure you keep scraping the sides and the bottom and make sure it's completely combined by giving it that extra bit of time. I wanted to have 2 different colours for my 2 squishies, and so once I'd finished mixing, I put the empty cup onto the weighing scales and measured 20 grams of my mixture into there, and then I knew I had exactly the right amount for my second squishy before adding the pigment. For these 2, I'm using the flocking powder that came in the kit for a pigment, and it works quite nicely. It gives you a soft finish and it's fine for when it's just a background colour, because I'm going to be covering these when they're finished with more flocking powder, so it just gives it a little bit of background colour. If you want your colour to be stronger and more intense, I would recommend purchasing some silicone pigment, which is an oil-based pigment. Or you can use mica powders, they work well too. However, I did come across one issue by using mica powders, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So I'm adding just a little bit at a time until I get the right colour. So I'm fast forwarding just because it took me a while. I always find it better to add a little bit at a time rather than adding too much, because that could cause problems if it's too thick and gloopy. Once I'd finished adding the pigment, I set the mixing cups to one side while I added some Vaseline to my mould. Bubbles aren't really a problem in the flex rubber, but if there are any in there, just give them a chance to come to the top for a couple of minutes while you're adding the Vaseline to the mould, because yeah, there might be a couple in there, but it degasses by itself really easy. So anyway, like I said, I'm adding petroleum jelly, otherwise known as Vaseline, with a Q-tip to my mould. I'm making sure it's completely covered with the petroleum jelly, and that will stop the flex rubber from sticking to the mould. And then once the mould was fully greased, I could add the flex rubber, and it's very straightforward. Just pour it in slowly and it finds its own way into all the nooks and crannies. My plan was to do one in the matte side and one in the shiny side, but as it turned out, I ended up doing 4, which you'll see later on anyway. So all the pours were done. So the curing time required is different depending on how warm your room is and how much you've poured. What I did actually was I just left it until the next day because I wasn't in a rush. But in the very last thing that I made, which was off camera, I left it for 6 hours and that was fine. So yeah, it'll just need a bit of experimenting before I can give you better advice on that one. Okay then, so when I received my flex rubber, I started looking on the internet to see some inspiration, and oh my goodness, when I saw some of the cute animals that you could make, I just had to get myself a couple more moulds. So I bought a rabbit mould and a hamster mould, and as it turns out, they both take 50 grams of flex rubber. So here I'm measuring out 50 grams of part A and 50 grams of part B so that I can do my rabbit and my hamster. But you've seen the measuring and the mixing before, so we'll skip the rest of this. Now then, this is the hamster mould which I purchased. Now, when you're purchasing moulds to use with flex rubber, I would highly recommend getting very soft and malleable moulds so that you can turn them inside out very easily, as you can see here. Don't get stiff moulds because you will have trouble with the demolding. And you can see here I'm adding plenty of the Vaseline, especially into the little area where it's got feet. You can't see it, but it's got tiny little paws and tiny little ears. Make sure you get Vaseline in there. Enough, but not too much, because otherwise you'll end up with kind of missing bits where it was clumped up and the silicone won't go into there because there's too much Vaseline. So yeah, you've got to kind of strike a balance between not too much and not too little, yeah. So my first one did go a bit wrong for 2 reasons. I think I added too much Vaseline and it was clumping, and then when I demolded it, I didn't quite have the right technique. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Here's my rabbit mould. It's a food mould, and once again, it's nice and bendy. So first I'm going to pour the hamster, and I decided not to use any pigment at all for the hamster because I wanted you to be able to see what it looked like without any pigment in it. Now, because it's got those tiny little ears at the bottom of the mould, I just added a little bit, and I used my micro brush to just make sure that the silicone was going into those tiny little ears. Yeah, with this one, actually, it lost one of its ears, which was such a shame, but never mind. I think the ears are actually the best part, and the chubby cheeks as well. The chubby cheeks are great on this hamster, but I love the tiny little ears. So yeah, you'd need to be careful when you're demolding with this particular mould, which I learned when I demolded this one. But now I've got the technique right, I know how to do it. Right, so once I'd poured the hamster, it was time for the rabbit. But I wanted my rabbit to be grey. I'd already made a white one when I practiced with it, and you'll see that one later. So I wanted to make it a bit different, and I went for grey. So I'm using the black flocking for this one, and you will see with the black that it goes kind of speckly. It's not a clear colour. So if you're just using it as a pigment and you're not going to be flocking over the top afterwards, yeah, it won't be a very clear way to colour it. But because I'm going to be flocking this with white, I just wanted the darkness. I didn't care if it was speckly. It worked really well actually, and you'll see soon. But yeah, if you're not going to be using flocking powder at the end to cover it with, I would recommend once again using a pigment which is specifically for silicone. Well, I said before that 100 grams would be enough, but actually I needed a tiny bit more. So maybe if I did this again and did 2 again, I would do 51 grams for each, so 102 grams altogether. Anyway, I mixed up a little bit extra, but then ended up with too much. So that's when I decided to do 2 more of the paws. This time I had just enough flex rubber to fill up the pads of the paws. So not the whole mould, just the pads. And then I came back later on and filled it up with a different colour. But for now I'm using mica powder just so that I can show you that mica powder colours it nicely as well. So at this point I'll tell you what happened in my practice with the mica powder. So on my first attempt with this, I used mica powders to colour everything and it looked really good. But I think I added too much mica powder because what happened was when it came time to add the flocking powder when they were out of the moulds, and that's when you need them to be really sticky because you're adding the flocking powder, there were parts of it that the powder just wouldn't stick to. And I think that because I added too much mica powder, it had kind of dropped down to the surface of the mould, and there were parts that just weren't sticky enough to take the flocking powder. And so, yeah, if you're going to pigment your flex rubber with mica powder, do be careful that you don't add too much mica powder. Anyway, moving forward in time, I left that about 3 hours, then came back and mixed up some more of the flex rubber to fill up those paw moulds. And this time I'm just using some white flocking powder to pigment it. So I could have waited just 5 or 6 hours to demold it once it felt nice and firm to the touch, but I left it to the next day. So let's have a look at how these things come out of the mould. Okay then, so I do like to wear nitrile gloves when I'm doing this, but only because I'm not so keen on the way it feels before it's been covered in the flocking powder. That's just me. I have sensory issues. Being autistic, which you might have guessed if you've watched a lot of my videos, I am actually autistic. Yeah, I have some sensory issues and this part is not great for me. However, once they're covered in the flocking powder, I absolutely love the feel of them and I can't get enough. I would hold them all day if I could. But anyway, yeah, what you'll have just seen me doing is dragging it away from the edge of the mould before gently pushing from the bottom and then peeling it off. And yeah, it comes out really easily and it's very, very strong. So with these squishies, some people like to leave them exactly as they are now and not put anything else on them, and you can just put them directly into the bag that came with the kit or do the next step, which I'm going to do next. So yeah, there's 2 ways of having these. But don't they look cool? I think they're great. So I don't know about you, but Yeah, I can't really tell which ones came from the matte side and which ones came from the shiny side. They all look kind of the same to me. And definitely when they're covered in the flocking powder, they're all the same. Right, onto the rabbit, and that came out really, really easily. I definitely left the trickiest one until last. So as you can see, by using the flocking powder to pigment it, it's kind of a bit wishy-washy, I suppose, but it does its job. All I wanted was a background colour, because that's going to be covered in white to get a beautiful grey effect, and you'll see that soon. It works so well. Okay, the one that I was worried about is the hamster, because I knew my first one had gone wrong because of the way I demolded it. What I did with the first one was I kind of just turned the mould inside out, and it stretched everything, and it caused some cracks in the surface of the finished squishy. It was still usable. It's the brown one that you'll see later. And once it was covered in flocking powder, it wasn't too bad. But yeah, do it gradually, as you can see me doing now. Just a little bit at a time, pulling it away from the edges, then bending the mould over a bit more, then releasing it from the edges and, bending the mould a bit more. So yeah, that's the best way to do the body. But for this one, when I took it out, I kind of pulled it away from the mould. When I got to the ears, I just gave it a pull, and it stretched the ears, and one of them broke. And so yeah, I had one big ear and one small ear. So what I had to do was trim the big ear. As you can see there, do you see it's real stretchy? I had to trim that so that it matched the ear that broke. So I did do a third one off camera. And what I did was when I got to the ears, when I was demolding it, I grabbed the ears while there was, the parts that were coming out. As they started to come out, I grabbed them before pulling the mould any further so that they didn't stretch. And then they came out all in one go. I should have filmed it, but anyway, that's kind of what I did. So here I'm just trimming that stretched ear, and it turned out okay in the end. It just had little ears, which is good really. It makes them all a little bit different if the ears are different, doesn't it? Okay, before we get on to the really fun part, it's time to make some eyes. If you wanted to, you could paint the eyes on, but I wanted to make some with UV resin. And here I'm just drawing out some circles to try and make sure I get my eyes all the same size. Didn't quite work out like that, but that was my intention. Then I just put the silicone mat that I had. That was from my Let's Resin levelling table, that silicone mat. So it's nice and clear. Put that over the top and then just added drops of black UV resin, and that's from Let's Resin too. Once I'd done 4 eyes, I put it under my UV lamp to cure for a few seconds, just because I didn't want those droplets spreading out and getting larger. So yeah, just putting it under the lamp for a few seconds just stops it from moving, so that you can do the rest and they'll stay the same size while you do the rest. So that gives you the gist of how I made the eyes, and now I have a good selection. And then I just added a dab of E6000 glue onto the back of the eye and placed it onto the hamster. Now the E6000 glue does take 24 hours to fully cure, but after an hour or so it was, not too bad at all, and I could do the flocking on it. But you do need to give it a day or so before you know that the eyes are permanent. But yeah, after that I found that the eyes don't want to come off, and the E6000 glue works really well. I believe you can use super glue as well, but I can't stand the stuff. The smell of it is terrible. So I can't use super glue. E6000 doesn't really smell of much, so I really like that. Right, so it's got its eyes on and it's ready for its fur. I did the same thing for the rabbit, but I gave the rabbit bigger eyes. I thought they looked better. So, right, okay, let's see what's next. We'll start with the paw prints. Now, I have my flocking powder ready, and we have the box here that comes with the kit. And I'm just going to pour some of my pink flocking powder into the box. And the way I like to do it is to pour it in and then take my flex rubber shape and just roll it about in there, squish it about, make sure it's completely covered on all sides, and then take a soft brush and brush off the excess. That's the way I've found that I quite like to do it. Some people like to actually just apply it with a brush very carefully. So there's two ways of doing it. It's up to you which way you choose. I really need some more soft brushes. I'm waiting for some to arrive, but this wisp brush actually worked really well. Anyway, look at that. Isn't that beautiful? No more stickiness, just totally soft and amazing to touch. I'm a little bit obsessed, I have to say. I could just hold them and squeeze them all day, and it's really soothing. Isn't that cute? I love it. Right. I'll just show you one more before we move on to the rabbit and the hamster, because I do think it's quite enjoyable to watch. And I do apologise for the background noise today. We're in the middle of a bit of a storm. The wind is really bad and it's blowing all my window blinds, so you've probably heard them banging about a little bit in the background, but I do like to have the windows open, so yeah, it was either close the windows or have some background noise, and I opted for the background noise. So there we go. Look, oh, another one. Aren't they just beautiful? I love these, and I'm wanting to get some different moulds as well. I know Let's Resin are planning on getting some moulds in stock that go well with the flex rubber. I think it really suits cute animals, don't you? So speaking of cute animals, let's have a look. First we'll do the rabbit, and as I've already said, I wanted it to be grey, so I've made it a dark grey or black colour, and I'm covering it in white to get that nice grey effect. So there's white in there now. Let's give the rabbit its white fluff bath. So with the rabbit and the hamster, I was being quite careful because the eyes hadn't had the full amount of curing time to make them permanent, and I didn't want them coming off. So yeah, I'm just dabbing the powder on with my brush. I do give it a little bit of a roll around, but I'm just mindful of where the eyes are and not to knock them too much. I fast forwarding because I spent quite a long time on this, not because I needed to, just because I was enjoying it. Honestly, it's so enjoyable to just sit there tapping the powder onto the surface and making it look just absolutely gorgeous. And yeah, I did take longer than I needed to. So here it is with most of the excess gently brushed off, and it's ready for its rosy cheeks. But I think that looks very cute, and I think it looks like mochi, don't you? I've been craving mochi since making these. Absolutely beautiful. You just want to squidge them, don't you? Okay, so next I did exactly the same thing with the cute hamster. Now, what I did find was, because I didn't pigment it and I was just using it with that translucent effect, it didn't look quite as good somehow. I think it would have been better if I had added some white flocking powder to the flex rubber to give it a less, a more opaque background. Yeah, it worked okay, but yeah, I would have preferred it with some pigment in there, but he's very cute, and even cuter when he gets his rosy cheeks. And so without further ado, let's do the rosy cheeks. Now, you have a couple of options when you do this. You can use makeup, so I've got eyeshadow there, and I also have some blusher, but I ended up just using the eyeshadow. You can use chalk pastels, just powdered up a little bit. You can use mica powder. I've used that and that works well as well. But yeah, in this instance, I'm just using the pink from that cheap eyeshadow set that I had, and it works really well. And I've got a brush where I cut the end off it ages ago so that I could stipple with it, and that works really well with the end cut off. It's really good for stippling, and I think the rosy cheeks make all the difference. I used a finer brush to add some to the nose because it's a smaller area, and to the inside of the ears, and that just gave it another finishing touch. And here I'm doing the same thing with the hamster, and yeah, I love it. I think there's something about this chubby little hamster that it just makes you want to squeeze it all the time. I just think it's so cool. And my husband loves them as well. And he's not really, just like me, really. Neither of us are into cute things, teddy bears and all of that. And things that are cute. I've never bought a cute mould in my life because I'm not into it. But this has converted me. This is just so cute. And I just want to hold it and squeeze it all day long. So I decided to do the same thing with the paws, because although some of them were 2 colours, some of them were just 1 colour, and they were a bit boring. They needed jazzing up. And so, yeah, I just powdered these as well with a little bit of eyeshadow, and I think it made all the difference. Before we move on to me showing you the packaging, I just wanted to show you a top tip that I discovered. As I mentioned at the beginning, what you've seen today is my second attempt. I made some mistakes with my first ones. This one I wasn't happy with it at all. It just went wrong. And so I wanted to remove the flocking and start again. And what I discovered was if you use hand sanitizer and rub it in and keep rubbing, all the flocking after a while starts to come off. You do need to be patient and just keep on adding the hand sanitizer and rubbing it around, but it's quite enjoyable again because it feels nice. And I've got a bowl of warm water there as well to rinse it off, and also some hand soap. So once I'd got rid of nearly all the flocking, I dipped it in the water to rinse it off and then gave it a good wash with some hand soap. And then it feels really smooth and not sticky. But once it dries, you'll find that it's sticky again, so you can start your flocking process just like it's just come out of the mould and it's nice and fresh and sticky. So yeah, it's a really good way to get rid of the flocking powder and start again if you don't like the colour you've used or the technique that you've used. Okay, so as you saw at the beginning, the kit comes with lots of bags to put your squishies into. It's very generous actually, because there's more bags than you couldn't make enough squishies with the amount of flex rubber that's in the packaging, but they give you loads of bags anyway, so that's really good. And I'm adding some little pom-poms and some little glass pebbles as well, just to give it a bit of interest, because that's traditionally how squishies are sold, with some extra bits and bobs in the bag, because some people like to keep the squishies in the bag and squish them like that rather than taking them out. It's just a case of what your preference is, but it's nice to have other things in there to jazz it up a bit. And I've made my own labels to put onto the bag for that professional touch, and I do like it with my labels on. I think these will be brilliant stocking fillers for Christmas time, not only for children but for adults as well. I know I would love to receive one because I think they're brilliant. They're so soothing to hold. I'm actually quite hooked on this now. So my request to Let's Resin is please introduce this to your UK store, because at the moment they don't have it in the UK and I want it. I want to buy some. Now normally the things I use in my Let's Resin videos, they're sent to me and I don't have to pay for them. But, with this, I love it so much. If it was available in the UK, I would be happily buying more. So please introduce it to the UK. And also my other request is I would like to be able to buy it in bottles without them being part of a kit, so just the bottles of flex rubber without the other things, because once you've got the other things you don't want to have those every time because you'll end up with too much. I got a little bit carried away with that. But yeah, how are you doing for cuteness overload? Oh, those cheeks. Well, I hope I've inspired you to have a try with Let's Resin's Flex Rubber. It really is so much fun. I will leave links and discount codes in the video description. If you've enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you would like to. And I will see you again next time. Thank you for watching and bye for now.